This is problem 4-10A in your Cengage text. I just wanted to walk you through a few of the transactions and at least through the process of journalizing and posting a few of the transactions so you'll be more comfortable with it. In this particular problem, we have balances already existing in the accounts. So the first thing that we'll need to do is go in and enter these beginning balances in all of the general ledger accounts. So I'm going to go down to the general ledger and we're just going to enter the date and then go over and enter the balance. So you will just copy the balances directly from your trial balance into the general ledger. Okay, so this one's a little different. It's not a brand new business like we're accustomed to seeing. It's a business that's already been in existence, so it already has some balances in its accounts. So first let's journalize a few transactions and then we'll go over and then post them to the general ledger. So the first one is we paid rent for $300. So we'll go over to our general journal and enter that transaction. I've already got it entered. I entered the date, the debit account. We're going to increase rent expense by $300 and then decrease cash with a credit of $300. So remember the process. We enter all our transactions in the general journal and then we post them over to the general ledger. So let's take these accounts and move them over with their amounts to the general ledger. So rent expense is debited for $300. So we're going to go down and find the ledger and we need the account rent expense. So remember that every single account has its own general ledger where we can keep up with this balance. So on June 1st, we already had a balance of $900 and then we paid rent for the month of June. We debited for $300. Remember, that's the account that we're bringing over. And we have a debit and a debit. We have a $900 balance and a $300 balance, both in the debits. If it's a debit and a debit, you add. If it's a debit and a credit, you would subtract. And then the number, whichever is higher, is where the balance goes. In this case, they're both debits, so we're going to add a debit and a debit, and then we'll get a debit balance of $1,200. Now, we already have the posting reference here for us. It was already entered, but if you needed to enter it, it's the page number where the journal entry was in the journal where this transaction came from. So now we need to enter the posting reference over in the general journal, and that's the account number where we entered the transaction. So if we go back up to our journal, our posting reference will be, I think that was 521. I have a short memory. Okay, cash got credited for $300. So now we're going to go to the general ledger to the cash account. Okay, here's our cash. And then on June 1st, we're giving it a credit of $300. So all we're doing is moving the debits and credits over to the appropriate account here. We had a debit balance of $38.26. We have now credited this account for $300. A debit and a credit you subtract, and the balance goes here because the debit is higher than the credit. So the the $35.26 will be on the debit side. So keep in mind too your normal balances. Cash is increased with the debit, so its normal balance side is going to be a debit. You will hardly ever, you shouldn't ever have a credit in the cash account as a balance. You can credit the cash account, but it should not be your balance. Okay, this account number is 101, so we'll go back up to our journal and enter our posting reference using the account number there of 101. Okay, let's check out our second transaction. We performed delivery services for 300, so since we performed something, we've earned some revenue, so the 300 will be credited to revenue. And so we have to ask ourselves, how did we receive our revenue? Well, 100 of it came to us in cash, and the other 200 is owed to us. It's $200 we're going to receive in the future, so that's accounts receivable. So on June 2nd, let's get this transaction in our journal. Okay, so we received cash on June 2nd of 100, and then we received an accounts receivable of 200. Those are debited, and then our delivery fees will be credited for 300. Remember to always keep your revenue on the credit side. So now let's take these one by one and post them over to the general ledger. So we gave cash a debit, so we're going to go over to the cash general ledger, and on June 2nd we gave cash a debit of 100. Okay, it already had a debit balance of $35.26. We gave it another debit, so we add those two, so our balance will be $36.26. Our posting reference is already here for the general ledger. It's the page number of the journal. We're going to go back over to our general journal and enter the 101 as our posting reference. Okay, posting references are important because in the journal it tells you that it has been posted over to the ledger, and then in the ledger it tells us where the number came from. So notice that this is the general journal page 7, so that's the reason J7 is over in the general ledger as the posting reference. Okay, now we need to go to accounts receivable and give it a debit of 200. So accounts receivable should be right after cash. Okay, June 2nd, we're going to give that a debit of 200. So we have a debit and a debit, so our new balance is $14.12. We've added those together. Make sure not to just bring your number over. You've got to take into consideration the balance that already exists. Okay, the account number for accounts receivable is 122. So we're going to go back and enter 122 as the posting reference because it tells us that we have posted that entry, and in the ledger it tells us it came from page 7 in the journal. Next is delivery fees. It was credited for 300. So let's go find delivery fees. And on June 2nd, it had a credit of 300. It already had a credit of $98.80. So if we add the $98.80 credit with the 300 credit, we get a credit. So if you have a credit and another credit, you'd add those two together and get a credit. And I believe that's $10,180 is our ending balance in this account. Our journal entry came from the journal page 7, so we've got to go back in and enter our account number as our posting reference in the journal, and that was 401. So I hope this clears up some questions about journalizing and posting.